Welcome, class, to our last week of this quarter and our last week of reading Robin Hood. Sorry, my webcam is not set up right now, so you just have to listen to my voice. I hope you guys are doing well, and I hope you are all doing your best to stay on top and getting caught up with your schoolwork, all right? As I said, this is our last week before the end of the quarter and before Christmas break. So you need to do everything that you need to do to stay on top. You have to make some sacrifices if you're behind. You can't watch as many shows or play as many games. You got to, put in the time to get caught up and finish this quarter strong. So those that are on track, we have 6 chapters that we're going to be doing this week. So you might have to do a chapter or 2 a day, and then the rest you might have to do 2 chapters one day, and the rest you can just do 1 chapter or read it all at once. But remember to take a break, grab some food or water if you are getting hungry or thirsty or losing focus, and then come back to the book. So the last few chapters that we read about the tournament that King Harry held, and that Robin Hood and his men ended up winning, and that King Harry would honor his agreement, or King Henry, right, would honor his agreement and not go after Robin Hood until after 40 days. But then we learned that King Henry ended up passing away anyways. We learned the last few chapters were talking about how Robin Hood gave money to King Richard of Leah and gave him 400 coins of gold, and that King Richard said he would pay him back. And in the next chapter we read about how Robin Hood and his men got the Bishop of Hereford and brought him to dinner and ended up taking the gold coins back that the bishop received from King Richard. So Robin Hood already got his money back. So that's where we left off, and now we're on chapter 16, how the sheriff held another shooting match. I'm just going to take a quick break to grab a drink of water. 1 second. Or to grab a drink. Okay. Here we go. So make sure you're following along and staying focused. Either read aloud with me, read the words in your mind and follow along, and that will help you remember more of what we're reading. To tell the truth, I'm well informed. Young match 'tis a while. The sheriff, I wis, devises this, us archers to beguile. A whiz is to know. So it sounds like the sheriff is going to try to trap the archers, probably meaning Robin Hood. The sheriff was so greatly troubled over the growing power of Robin Hood that he did a very foolish thing. He went to London to lay his troubles before the king and got more troops to cope with the outlaws. King Richard was not yet returned from the Holy Land, but Prince John heard him with scorn. "Pooh," said he, shrugging his shoulders. "What have I to do with all this? Are you not sheriff for me? The law is in force that lets you deal with those who injure you. Go, get gone, and by yourself devise some trick to trap these rebels, and never let me see your face at court again until you have a better tale to tell." So away the sheriff went, sorrier than ever, and beat his brain on the way home for some plan of action. His daughter met him on his return, and when she learned what the prince had said, his words started her thinking. "I have it," she exclaimed at length. "We will hold another shooting match. We will proclaim a general amnesty, as King Harry himself did, and say that the field is open to all comers. Robin Hood's men will be tempted to twang the bow, and then, said the sheriff, jumping in, "we shall see on which side of the gate they stay overnight." So the sheriff lost no time in announcing a tournament, to be held that autumn at the fair. It was open to all comers, said the proclamation, and no one would be molested in their going and coming. Furthermore, an arrow with a golden head and silver shaft would be given to the winner, who would be named the finest archer in all the north country. This news came in due course to Robin Hood and fired his impetuous spirit. "Prepare you, my merry men," said he, "and we'll go to the fair and take part in this sport." With that, the cobbler, David of Doncaster, stepped forward. "Master," said he, "do not leave the forest. To tell the truth, I'm well informed that the match is a trap. The sheriff has planned it to lead us into treachery." "That sounds cowardly," replied Robin, "and pleases me not. Let come what will, I'll try my skill at the tourney." Then Little John spoke up. "Listen to me how it shall be that we will not be discovered. We will leave our suits of Lincoln green behind us. One shall wear white, another red, one yellow, another blue, and thus all shall go in disguise." This advice met with a general favor, and Maid Marian and Mistress Dale, assisted by Friar Truck, prepared some colored costumes and fitted out the men so that others would take them for villagers, dressed for the holiday. And on the fair day they left the greenwood with brave hearts. Along the highway they fell in with many other fellows from the countryside, going with their lasses toward the wide open gates of Nottingham. So in through the gates trooped the whole happy company, Robin's men behaving and laughing and talking as noisily as the rest. The sheriff's scowling men-at-arms stood about and sought anyone who looked like one of Robin's men, but without success. The herald now set forth the terms of the contest, and presently the shooting began. Robin had chosen 5 of his men to shoot with him. The rest were to mingle with the crowd, and also watch the gates. These 5 were Little John, Will Scarlet, Will Stuteley, Much, and Allan a Dale. The other competitors made a brave showing on the first round, especially Gilbert of the White Hand, who was present and never shot better. The contest narrowed down until, in the end, Gilbert and Robin alone were left to shoot for the possession of the arrow with the golden head. The shooting went forward, and Robin's men had done so well that the air was filled shouts. Thus won the second round of the shooting, and thus the third and last, until even Gilbert of the White Hand was fairly beaten. During all this shooting, Robin exchanged no word with his men. Each treated the other as a perfect stranger. Nonetheless, such great shooting could not pass without revealing the archers. The sheriff believed the winner of the golden arrow to be Robin Hood, so he secretly sent word for his men-at-arms to close round the group. But Robin's men also saw the trap closing. To keep up appearances, the sheriff summoned the crowd to form a circle, to give time enough for the soldiers to close in. And after as much delay as possible, the arrow was presented. As Robin received his prize, bowed and turned away, the sheriff grasped him around the neck and called upon his men to arrest him. But the moment the sheriff touched Robin, he received such a blow on the side of his head that he let go instantly and fell back several paces. Turning to see who had struck him, he recognized Little John. By this time, fighting broke out everywhere. The sheriff's men were being hampered by the crowd of innocent onlookers, whom they could not tell from the outlaws, and so dared not to attack. Meanwhile, the other outlaws in the rear fell upon them and put them in confusion. For a moment the sheriff's men took a beating. Then, with a clear bugle note, Robin ordered a retreat. The 2 guards at the nearest gate tried to close it, but were shot dead in their tracks. David of Doncaster threw a 3rd soldier into the moat, and out through the gate went the foresters in good order, keeping a safe distance between themselves and the soldiers by means of their well-aimed arrows. But the fight was not to go easily this day. The soldiers, knowing that the eyes of the whole shire were upon them, fought well and pressed closely after the retreating outlaws. More than one ugly wound was given and received. 5 of the sheriff's men were killed outright and a dozen others injured. 4 of Robin's men were bleeding from severe cuts. Then Little John, who had fought by the side of his chief, suddenly fell forward with a moan. An arrow had pierced his knee. Robin seized the big fellow with almost superhuman strength, took him on his back, and carried him more than a mile. Meanwhile, Little John grew weaker and closed his eyes. At last he sank to the ground and feebly motioned Robin to let him lie. "Master Robin," said he, "have I not served you well ever since we met upon the bridge?" "A truer friend a man never had," answered Robin. "Then if you ever loved me, and for the sake of that friendship, draw your bright sword and strike off my head. Never let me fall alive into the hands of the sheriff of Nottingham. Not for all the gold in England would I do either of these things you suggest." "God forbid!" cried Arthur a Bland, who was Little John's cousin, as he hurried to the rescue, and packing his wounded kinsman upon his own broad shoulders, he soon brought him within the shelter of the forest. Once they were there, the sheriff's men did not follow. Little John and the other 4 wounded men were quickly carried through the wood to Friar Tuck's hermitage, where their wounds were dressed. Little John's injury was the most serious of any. He was reassured that in 2 or 3 weeks, that time he could get about again, news which caused the active giant to groan mightily. That evening fear came upon the hearts of the band. A careful roll call was taken to see if any of the yeomen had escaped. Will Stuteley was missing, and Maid Marian also was nowhere to be found. Robin was gripped with dread. He knew that Marian had gone to the fair, for absent meant danger to her, and he feared that it was connected with Will Stuteley. The sheriff would hang him speedily and without mercy if he were captured. The rest of the band knew that if Will were captured, the battle must be fought over again the next day, and Will must be saved at any cost. But no man flinched from the danger. That evening, while the sheriff and his wife and daughter sat at supper in the mansion house, the sheriff boasted of how he would make an example of the captured outlaw, for Stuteley had indeed fallen into his hands. "He shall be strung high," he said in a loud voice, "and none shall dare lift a finger. I now have Robin Hood's men on the run, and we shall soon see who is master in this shire. I am only sorry that we let them have the golden arrow." As he spoke, a message sped through a window and fell clattering upon his plate, causing him to spring back in alarm. It was the golden arrow, and on its shaft a little note was tied. It read, "I will take no gifts from liars, and from now on will show you no mercy. Look well to yourself, R.H." Probably meaning Robin Hood. Okay, so that was chapter 16. Robin Hood could be able to rescue Will Stuteley. Well, as we look at this title, it seems like they will be able to. Okay. I forgot to mention, I'm gonna be reading 4 chapters in this video and then 2 chapters in the next. Okay, so space out the chapters that will work with you best to finish the book on time and have time also to do your chapter study questions. Chapter 17, How Will Stuteley was Rescued. Forth of the greenwood are they gone, yea, all courageously, resolving to bring Stuteley home, or every man to die. The next day dawned bright and sunny. All of nature seemed happy, despite the tragedy that was soon to take place within the walls of Nottingham. The sheriff was determined to hang Will Stuteley. No man, therefore, was to be allowed through the town's gates until after the fatal hour of noon, when Will's soul was to be launched into eternity. Early in the day, Robin had drawn his men to a point in the woods where he could watch the road leading to the east gate. He was clad in a bright scarlet tunic, while his men wore their suits of Lincoln green. They were armed with broadswords, and each man carried his bow and a full quiver of new arrows, straightened and sharpened keenly. Over their greenwood dress, each man had thrown a rough cloak that made him look like a friar. "Comrades," said Robin then, "we'll wait here in hiding while we send someone forth to obtain tidings. It will do no good to march upon the gates if they are closed." "Look, master," said David of Doncaster, "there comes a palmer along the road from the town." Let me pause really quick and let's learn what a palmer is. So if we look down, a palmer is a person who made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. They often wore 2 crossed palm leaves as a sign of their journey. So a religious journey, a pilgrimage is a religious journey to the Holy Land. Okay. So continue to read up here the third sentence. "Perhaps he can tell us how the land lies, and if Stuteley is really in danger. Shall I speak to him?" "Go," answered Robin. So David of Doncaster went out, and when he had come close to the palmer, who seemed a slight youngish man, he lifted his cap courteously and said, "I beg your pardon, holy man, but can you tell me news of Nottingham? Do they intend to put an outlaw to death this day?" "Aye," answered the palmer sadly, "'tis true enough, sorry be the day. I have passed the very spot where the gallows tree is going up. Out upon the roadway near the sheriff's castle, Will Stuteley is to be hung at noon. I could not bear the sight, so I came away." The palmer spoke in a muffled voice. As his hood was pulled well over his head, he carried a long staff, and he had sandaled feet like any monk. David of Doncaster noticed idly that the feet were very small and white, but gave no second thought to the matter. "Who will hear the poor soul last confession, if you have left him?" he asked angrily. The question seemed to put a new idea into the palmer's head. He turned so quickly that he almost dropped his hood. Do you think that I should do this holy office? By Saint Peter and the Blessed Virgin, I do indeed. Else who will do it? The bishop may be there, but he would not say a prayer for Will's soul. But I am only a poor palmer, the other began hesitantly. But your prayers are as good as any, and better than some, replied David. Right, gladly will I go, said the palmer then. But I fear I cannot get into the city. The gates are locked to all who wish to come in, although they let anyone pass out who will. Come with me, said David, and my master will see that you pass through the gates. So the palmer pulled his coat still closer about him, and was brought before Robin Hood, to whom he told all he knew of the situation. He ended with, If I may make so bold, I would not try to enter the city from this gate. 'Tis closely guarded since yesterday, but on the far side no attack is looked for. My thanks, gentle palmer, said Robin. Your suggestion is good, and we will go to the gate on the far side. So the men marched silently but quickly until they were near the western gate. Then Arthur à Bland asked leave to go ahead as a scout and quietly made his way to a point under the tower by the gate. The moat was dry on this side, as this was a time of peace, and Arthur was further aided by a stout ivy vine which grew out from an upper window. Swinging himself boldly by means of this friendly vine, he crept through the window and sprung upon the guard from behind, and gripped him hard about the throat. The guard had no chance to utter the slightest sound, and soon lay bound and gagged upon the floor, while Arthur à Bland changed into his uniform and got hold of his keys. In a few moments more the gates were open, the drawbridge let down, and the rest of the band got inside the town so quietly that no one knew of their coming. Fortune also favored them, and the fact that just at this moment the prison doors opened for the march of the condemned man, and every soldier in the marketplace had trooped there to see him pass by. Out came Will Stuteley with firm steps, but a dejected air. He looked eagerly to the right and left, but saw none of the band, and though more than one curious face showed friendship in it, he knew no help could come from them. Will's hands were tied behind his back. He marched between rows of soldiers, and the sheriff and the bishop brought up the rear on horses, looking puffed up over their success. He would show these sturdy rebels, would the sheriff, whose word was law. He knew that the gates were tightly fastened, and further he believed that the outlaws would hardly dare to come within the walls again, even if the gates were open. And as he looked around at the 100 archers and swordsmen who lined the way to the gallows, he smiled with grim satisfaction. Seeing that no help was near, the prisoner paused at the foot of the scaffold and spoke in a firm tone to the sheriff. My lord sheriff, said he, since I must die, grant me one request. Give me a sword and let me fight till I lie dead on the ground. But instead the sheriff swore that Will should be hanged, a shameful death, and not die valiantly. To the gallows with him, he roared, giving a sign to the hangman. Stuteley was pushed into the cart which was to hold him under the gallows. While his neck was leashed, then the cart would be drawn away, and the unhappy man would swing out over the tail of it into another world. But at this moment came an interruption. A boyish-looking palmer stepped forth and said, Your Excellency, let me at least shrive this poor wretch's soul before it is hurled into eternity. Shrive is to listen to someone confessing his sins. No, shouted the sheriff, let him die a dog's death. Then his damnation will rest upon you, said the monk firmly. You, my lord bishop, cannot stand by and see this wrong done. The bishop hesitated. Like the sheriff, he wanted no delay, but the people were beginning to mutter among themselves and move about uneasily. He said a few words to the sheriff, and the latter nodded to the monk coldly. Perform your duty, he said, and be quick about it. Then turning to his soldiers, he commanded, Watch this palmer closely. He may be in league with those rascally outlaws. But the palmer paid no heed to his last words. He began to tell his beads quickly and to speak in a low voice to the condemned man. So we're going to scroll forward really quick and learn what tell his beads, what this phrase means. It means to pray the rosary. I'm pretty sure it's a Catholic prayer or Catholic saying. A string of beads used in praying about virtues in the lives of Jesus and Mary. All right, so this last sentence. but he did not touch the ropes binding his hands. Then came another stir in the crowd as one man came pushing through the press of people and soldiers to come near the scaffold. "I pray you, Will, before you die, say goodbye to all your friends," cried out the well-known voice of Much, the miller's son. At these words, the palmer stepped back suddenly and looked to one side. The sheriff also knew the speaker. "Seize him!" he shouted. "He is the villain cook who once robbed me of my silver plate. We'll make a double hanging of this." "Not so fast, Sheriff," retorted Much. "First catch your man, then hang him. But meanwhile, I would like to borrow my friend a while." And with one stroke of his keen hunting knife, he cut the bonds that fastened the prisoner's arms. And Stuteley leaped lightly from the cart. "Treason!" screamed the sheriff, getting back with rage. So saying, he spurred his horse fiercely forward and, rising in his stirrups, brought down his sword powerfully at Much's head. But his former cook dodged nimbly underneath the horse and came up on the other side, while the weapon whistled harmlessly in the air. "Nay, Sir Sheriff," he cried, "I must borrow your sword for my friend." Then he snatched the weapon deftly from the sheriff's hand. "Here, Stuteley," said he, "the sheriff has lent you his own sword. Get back with me, man, and we'll teach these knaves a trick or two." Meanwhile, the soldiers had recovered from their momentary surprise and had flung themselves into the fray. A clear bugle note had also sounded, the one that the soldiers had learned to dread. It was the rallying note of Robin's men. Arrows began to hurtle through the air, and Robin and his men cast aside their cloaks and sprang forward, crying, "Locksley, Locksley, a rescue, a rescue!" Terrible hand-to-hand fighting followed. The sheriff's men, though once more taken by surprise, were determined to prevent the rescue at all costs. They packed in stubbornly around the condemned man and Much and the palmer, and it was only by desperate attacks that the foresters made an opening in the square. Ugly cuts and bruises were exchanged freely, and lucky was the man who escaped with only these. Many of the onlookers, who had long hated the sheriff and felt sympathy for Robin's men, also plunged in the conflict and aided the rescuers. At last, Robin cut a way through the fighting to the scaffold itself, and not a second too soon, two soldiers had leaped upon the cart and were about to stab the palmer and Will Stuteley. A mighty upward blow from Robin's blade sent the sword flying from the hand of one, while a well-directed arrow from the outskirts pierced the other fellow's throat. "God save you, master," cried Will Stuteley joyfully. "I had begun to fear that I would never see your face again." "A rescue!" shouted the outlaws afresh, and the soldiers began to sink back, but they retreated in close order toward the east gate, resolved to hem the attackers within the city walls. But the outlaws did not go out by the nearest gate. They started heading in that direction in order to mislead the soldiers, then abruptly turned and headed for the west gate, which was still guarded by Arthur à Bland. The sheriff's men raised a shout at this, thinking they had the enemy trapped. They charged after them, but the outlaws soon got through the gate and over the bridge that had been let down by Arthur à Bland. Close upon their heels came the soldiers, so close that Arthur had no time to close the gate again or raise the bridge. So he threw away his key and joined with the yeomen in the retreat up the long hill to the woods. On this side of the town, the road leading to the forest was long and open. The greenwood men were therefore in some distress, for the archers shot at them from loopholes in the walls, and the soldiers were reinforced by a company of mounted men from the castle. But the outlaws retreated stubbornly, and now and again turned to hold their pursuers at bay by a volley of arrows. Stuteley was in their midst, fighting with the energy of two, and the little palmer was there also, but took no part except to keep close to Robin's side and mutter silent words as though in prayer. Robin put his horn to his lips to sound a rally, when a flying arrow from the enemy pierced his hand. The palmer gave a little cry and sprang forward. The sheriff, who followed close with his men on horseback, also saw the wound and gave a great hurrah. "Ha! You will shoot no more bows for a season, Master Outlaw," he shouted. "You lie," retorted Robin fiercely, wrenching the shaft from his hand despite the streaming blood. "I have saved one shot for you all this day. Here, take it." And he fitted the same arrow that had wounded him upon the string of his bow and let it fly toward the sheriff's head. The sheriff fell forward upon his horse in mortal terror, but not quickly enough to escape unhurt. The sharp point cut a deep dash across his scalp and would certainly have killed him if he had come closer. The sheriff's fall confused his followers for the moment, and Robin's men took this chance to speed on up the hill. The palmer had whipped out a small white handkerchief and tried to staunch Robin's wound as they went. At sight of the palmer's hand, Robin turned and pushed back the other's hood. "Marian!" he exclaimed. "You hear?" It was indeed Maid Marian, who had helped save Will and been in the battle from the first. Now she hung her head as though caught doing wrong. I had to come, Robin," she said simply, "and I knew you would not let me otherwise." Their talk was interrupted by an exclamation from Will Scart. "By the saints, we are trapped," he said, and pointed to the top of the hill toward which they were moving. From out of a gray castle poured a troop of men armed with pikes and axes, who shouted and came running down upon them. At the same instant, the sheriff's men also renewed their pursuit. "Alas!" cried poor Marian, "we are doomed. There is no way of escape." "Courage, dear heart," said Robin, drawing her close to him, but his own spirit sank as he looked about for some way out. Then, O joyful sight, he recognized at the head of those coming from the castle Sir Richard of the Lea. He was smiling now and greatly excited. "A rescue! A rescue!" he cried. Never were there more welcome sights and sounds than these. With a great cheer, the outlaws raced up the hill to meet their new friends. Soon the whole force was inside the shelter of the castle. Bang went the bridges as it swung up. With great clanking of chains, clash went one heavy door upon the other as they shut out the sheriff, who dashed up at the head of his men, his face streaked with blood and inflamed with rage. That was a pretty awesome rescue. I'm going to just take a quick sip of my drink. 1 second. Okay, so we're halfway done with this video. 2 more chapters in this video. And then, as I said, the next video will have the last 2 chapters of Robin Hood. So I hope you guys are enjoying it. It's definitely a lot of action in these last few chapters. I wonder how Robin Hood and his men will get out of this, even though they have the protection of Sir Richard. I think we're going to learn about that right here. Chapter 18, how Sir Richard of the Lea repaid his debt. The proud sheriff loud gain cry, and said, "Thou traitor knight, thou keepest here the king's enemy against the laws and right." "Open the gates!" shouted the sheriff hoarsely to the sentinel upon the walls. "Open, I say, in the king's name." "Who are you to come brawling upon my land?" asked Sir Richard, who himself stepped forward upon the turret. "You know me well, traitor," said the sheriff. "Now give up the enemy of the king, whom you have sheltered against the laws." "Softly, sir," said the knight smoothly. "I confess that I have done certain deeds this day, but I have done them upon my own land, which you now trespass upon, and I shall answer only to the king for my actions." "Villain," said the sheriff, still in a towering passion, "I also serve the king. If these outlaws are not given up to me at once, I shall lay siege to the castle and burn it." First show me your warrants," said Sir Richard curtly. "My word is enough. I am Sheriff of Nottingham." "If you are," retorted the knight, "you should know that you have no authority within my lands, unless you bear the king's order. In the meantime, go mend your manners." And Sir Richard disappeared from the walls. The sheriff, after lingering a few moments longer, was forced to withdraw, muttering fiercely, "The king's order, that I shall have without delay, as well as this upstart knight's estate. King Richard is lately returned, I hear, from the Holy Land." Meanwhile, the knight had gone back to Robin Hood, and the 2 men greeted each other gladly. "Well, bold Robin," cried he, taking him in his arms, "the Lord has lately prospered me, and I say this day how I could repay my debt to you." "And so you have," answered Robin gaily. "Nay, 'twas nothing, a small service," said the knight. "I meant the money coming to you." "But it has all been repaid," said Robin. "My Lord Bishop of Hereford himself gave it to me." "The exact sum?" asked the knight. "The exact sum," answered Robin, winking. Sir Richard smiled but said no more. Robin was made to rest until dinner should be served. Meanwhile, a surgeon bound up his hand with ointment, promising him that he would soon be able to use it again. 10 other yeomen had been hurt, but luckily none had received serious wounds. They were all bandaged and made happy by tankards of ale. The feast was a joyous event. There were 2 long tables, and 200 men sat down at them and ate and drank, and afterwards sang songs. 140 of these men were Lincoln Green, wore Lincoln Green and called Robin Hood their chief. Never had there been a more gallant company at the table in Lea Castle. That night the foresters stayed within the friendly walls, and the next day they took their leave. Sir Richard took Robin aside to his strong room and pressed him again to take the 400 golden pounds. But his guest was firm. "Keep the money, for it is your own," said Robin. "I only made the bishop return that which he took unjustly." Sir Richard thanked him earnestly, and asked him and all his men to visit the armory before they departed. There they saw, placed apart, 140 good yew bows with fine waxen silk strings and 140 sheaves of arrows. Every shaft was set with peacock's feathers and notched with silver. "In truth, these are poor presents we have made you, Robin Hood," said Sir Richard, "but they carry with them 1,000 times their weight in gratitude." The sheriff made good his threat to inform the king. He rode to London the week following. His scalp wound having healed well enough to permit him to travel, he asked for an audience with King Richard, the lion-hearted himself. His Majesty had but lately returned from the Crusades and was just then looking into the state of his kingdom. The sheriff spoke at length concerning Robin Hood, how for many months the outlaws had defied the king and slain the king's deer, how Robin had gathered about him the best archers in all the countryside, and finally how the treacherous knight, Sir Richard of Lea, had rescued the band, when captured, seemed certain, and refused to deliver them up to justice. The king heard him through with intention, and said he, "I have heard of this Robin Hood and his men. Do not these same outlaws shoot in a royal tourney at Finsbury Field?" "They did, your Majesty, under a royal amnesty." "And did they come to the fair of Nottingham by stealth?" "Yes, your Majesty." "Did you forbid them to come?" "No, your Majesty, that is, speak out." "For the good of the shire," began the sheriff, flattering, we proclaimed an amnesty declaring that all men could come safely, but it was because these men had proved a menace that this trap was set." "Now," said the king, as his brow grew black, such treachery would be unknown in the camp of Saracen, and yet we call ourselves a Christian people." So a Saracen is Arabs who fought the Christians in the Crusades. The sheriff kept silent from fear and shame. Then the king spoke again. "My lord sheriff, we promise to look into this matter. Those outlaws must be taught that there is only one king in England, and that he stands for the law." So the sheriff was dismissed with very mixed feelings and went home to Nottingham. A fortnight is 2 weeks, so 2 weeks later, a fortnight later, the king began to make good his word by riding with a small party of knights to Lea Castle. Sir Richard was advised of the cavalcade's approach and quickly recognized the tall knight who rode in front of his royal master. Opening wide his castle gate, he went to meet the king and fell on one knee and kissed his stirrup. Sir Richard had been with the king in the Holy Land, and they had gone on many adventurous quests together. The king dismounted from his own horse to greet him as a brother in arms, and arm in arm they went into the castle, while bugles and trumpets sounded a joyous welcome in honor of the great occasion. After the king had rested and eaten, he turned to the knight and gravely inquired, "What is this I hear about your castle being a nest and harbor for outlaws?" Then Sir Richard of Lea, perceiving that the sheriff had been at the king's ear with this story, told the whole truth as he knew it, how the outlaws had befriended him in sore need, as they had befriended others, and how he had given them only a knight's protection in return. The king liked the story well, for his own soul was one of chivalry. And remember, we've learned about chivalry. It's the ideals of medieval knights that emphasize gallantry, honor, and courtesy, especially toward women. And he asked other questions about Robin Hood and heard of the ancient wrong done to his father before him, and of Robin's own enemies, and of his manner of living. "I must see this bold fellow for myself," cried King Richard, springing up. "If you will entertain my little company, and be ready to sally forth upon the second day, in quest of me if need be, I shall go alone into the greenwood to seek an adventure with him." Well, that was a quick one. Okay, so this is our last chapter for this video, and we just have 3 more chapters of Robin Hood. Okay, so if you need to take a break, pause the video and come back. Those that are just reading a chapter a day, you can pause, but those that are need to get caught up, maybe you gotta keep reading right now. Okay, so chapter 19, How King Richard Came to Sherwood Forest. King Richard, hearing of the pranks of Robin Hood and his men, he much admired and more desired to see both him and them. Then Robin takes a can of ale, come let us now begin, and every man shall have his can, here's a health unto the king. Friar Tuck nursed Little John's wounded knee, so skillfully that it was now healed. The last part of the nursing consisted chiefly of holding down the patient by force to his cot. Little John felt so well that he insisted upon getting up before the wound was healed. He would have done so if the friar had not piled some holy books upon his legs and sat upon his stomach. Under the vigorous treatment, Little John was forced to lie quiet until the friar gave him leave to get up. At last he and the friar went to join the rest of the band, who were very glad to see them. They sat round a big fire, for it was a chilly evening, and feasted in great content. A cold rain set in later, but the friar made his way back to his little hermitage. There he made himself a cheerful blaze, changed his dripping robe, and sat down with a sigh of satisfaction before a tankard of hot spiced wine and a pastry. Suddenly a voice was heard outside demanding to be let in. His kennel of dogs set up a furious uproar, proving the fact of a stranger's presence. "Now by St. Peter," growled the friar, "who comes here at this unseemly hour? Move on, friend, or my spiced wine will get cold." He was putting the tankard to his lips when a thundering rap sounded upon the door, making it quiver and causing Tuck almost to drop his tankard. An angry voice shouted, "Ho, within there! Open, I say!" "Go your way in peace," roared back the friar. "I can do nothing for you. It's but a few miles to Gamewell, if you know the road." "But I do not know the road, and if I did, I would not budge another foot. It's wet out and dry within, so open." "A plague seize you for disturbing a holy man in his prayers," muttered Tuck angrily. He unbarred the door in order to keep it from being battered down. Then lighting a torch at his fire and whistling for one of his dogs, he stepped out to see who his visitor might be. A tall knight clad in a black coat of mail, with a plumed helmet, stood before him. By his side stood his horse, also dressed in rich armor. "Have you no supper, brother?" asked the black knight curtly. "I must beg of you a bed and a bit of roof for tonight. I wish to refresh my body before I sleep." "I have no room that even your steed would accept, Sir Knight, and nothing to eat save a crust of bread and a pitcher of water." "I could smell better food than that, brother, and must force my company upon you, though I shall repay it with gold in the name of the church. As for my horse, let him but be blanketed and put on the sheltered side of the house." And with that, the knight boldly brushed past Tuck and his dog and entered the hermitage. Something about his masterful air pleased Tuck in spite of his rudeness. "Sit down, Sir Knight," said he, "and I will fasten up your steed and find him some grain. Half of my bed and board is yours this night, but we shall see later who is the better man and who is to give the orders. I can pay my keeping in blows or gold, as you prefer," said the knight laughingly. The friar presently returned and drew up a small table near the fire. "Now, Sir Knight," said he, "put off your sword and helmet and other war gear, and help me lay this table, for I am very hungry." The knight did as he was told and put aside the visor, which had hidden his face. He was a bronzed and bearded man with blue eyes and hair shot with gold. Then once again the priest sat down to his pastry and spiced wine. He said grace with some haste, and was surprised to hear his guest respond fittingly in the Latin tongue. Then they attacked the wine and pastry violently. Tuck looked regretfully at the rapid disappearing food, but did not begrudge it, because of the stories his guest told to enliven the meal. The wine and warmth of the room cheered them both, and they were soon laughing uproariously as the best of comrades in the world. The Black Knight, it seemed, had traveled everywhere. He had been on crusades, had fought the noble Saladin, had been in prison. I'm going to take a pause really quick and go forward and see. A Saladin is a Sultan of Egypt during the Third Crusade. He was a brilliant general and earned a reputation for chivalry among the Christian enemies. So he fought a noble Saladin, had been in prison and often in peril, but now he spoke of it lightly, laughed it off, and made himself so friendly that Friar Tuck was nearly choked with merriment. So passed the time till late, and the two fell asleep together, one on each side of the table. Friar Tuck awoke in a surly mood, but was speedily cheered by the sight of the Black Knight, who had already risen as happy as a lark, washed his face and hands, and was now stirring hot gruel over the fire. Gruel is thin oatmeal porridge. By my faith, I make a sorry host, cried Tuck, springing to his feet. And later, as they sat at breakfast, he added, I do not want your gold. Instead, I will do what I can to help you on your way whenever you wish to depart. Then tell me, said the knight, how I may find Robin Hood the outlaw. I have a message to him from the king. All day yesterday I sought him, but found him not. Friar Tuck lifted up his hands in holy terror. I am a lover of peace, Sir Knight. Do not keep company with Robin Hood. Nay, I mean no harm to Master Hood, said the knight, but I yearn to speak with him in person. If that is all, I can guide you to his hideaway, said Tuck, who foresaw in this night a possible gold bag for Robin. In truth, I could not live in these woods without hearing of the outlaws, but matters of religion are my chief joy and occupation. I will go with you, brother, said the Black Knight. So without more ado, they went into the forest, the knight riding upon his charger, and Tuck pacing along by his side. The knight sniffed the fresh air in delight. The good greenwood is the best place to live in, after all, said he. What court or capital can equal this for true men? None on this earth, replied Tuck smilingly, and once more his heart warmed toward this courteous stranger. They had not gone more than 3 or 4 miles along the road from Fountain Abbey to Barnesdale when of a sudden the bushes just ahead of them parted, and a well-built man with curling brown hair stepped into the road and laid his hand upon the knight's bridle. It was Robin Hood. He had seen Friar Tuck a little way back and shrewdly suspected his plan. Tuck, however, pretended not to know him at all. Hold, cried Robin. I am in charge of the highway this day, and must exact an accounting from all who pass. Who is it bids me hold? Asked the knight quietly. I am not in the habit of yielding to one man. Then there are others to keep me company, said Robin, clapping his hands, and instantly 10 of his men came out of the bushes and stood beside him. We are the yeomen of the forest, Sir Knight, continued Robin, and live under the greenwood tree. We have no means of support, thanks to the tyranny of our overlords, other than the aid which fat churchmen and goodly knights like yourself can give. And as you have churches and rents and gold in great plenty, we beseech you for charity's sake to give us some. I am but a poor monk, good sir, said Friar Tuck in a whining voice, on my way to the shrine of St. Dunstan. St. Dunstan is an English saint, the Archbishop of Canterbury and advisor to kings. He revived English monasteries after their destruction by Viking invaders. He was also known for his skill at playing the harp and making bells, according to legend. He once grabbed the devil by the nose with a pair of tongs. So that is St. Dunstan. Stay a while with us, answered Robin, biting back a smile. The Black Knight now spoke again. We are messengers of the king, said he. His Majesty himself waits near here and wishes to speak with Robin Hood. God save the king, said Robin, raising his cap loyally, and all who wish him well. I am Robin Hood, and the king has no more devoted subject than I, nor have I taken anything of his save perhaps a few deer for my hunger. My chief war is against the clergy and barons of the land, who bear down upon the poor. But I am glad, he continued, that I have met you here, and before we end you shall be my friend and taste of our forest hospitality. But what is the fee? Asked the knight, for I am told your feasts are costly. Nay, responded Robin, waving his hands. You are from the king, none the less. How much money is in your purse? 40 gold pieces, replied the knight. Robin took the 40 pounds and counted it. 1/2 he gave to his men and told them to drink to the king's wealth with it. The other half he handed back to the knight. Sir, said he courteously, have this for your spending. If you live with knights, with kings and lords, you will need it. Gramercy, replied the other, smiling. Then Robin walked on one side of the knight's steed and Friar Tuck on the other, till they came to the open glade before the caves of Barnesdale. Then Robin drew out his bugle and sounded the 3 signal blasts of the band. Soon there were more than 100 yeomen in sight. All were dressed in new suits of Lincoln green, and carried new bows in their hands, and bright short swords at their belts. And every man bent his knee to Robin Hood before taking his place at the tables, which were already set. A handsome page stood at Robin's side, and to pour his wine and that of the knight. The knight marveled at all he saw, and said to himself, These men of Robin Hood's give him some more obedience than my fellows give me. At the signal from Robin, the dinner began. There was venison and fowl and fish and wheat cakes and ale and red wine in great plenty, and it was a good sight to see the smiles upon the hungry men's faces. First they listened to a grace from Friar Tuck, and then Robin lifted high a tankard of ale. First, come, let us now begin, said he, in honor of our guest who comes with a royal message. Here's to the health of the king. The guests responded heartily this toast, and the men cheered noisily for King Richard. After the feast was over, Robin turned to his guests and said, "Now you shall see what life we lead, so that you may report faithfully, for good or bad, unto the king." At a signal from him, the men rose up and smartly bent their bows for practice. The knight was greatly astonished at the smallness of their targets. A branch was set up far down the glade, and a garland of rose was balanced on it. Whoever failed to send his shaft through the garland without knocking it off the branch would be struck by the hand of Friar Tuck. "Ho, ho!" cried the knight, as his traveling companion rose up and bared his brawny arm. "So you, my friend, are Friar Tuck?" "I have not denied it," replied Tuck, growling at having betrayed himself. "But chastisement is a rule of the church, and I am seeking the good of these stray sheep." David of Doncaster shot first and landed safely through the rows of garland. Then came Allan a Dale and Little John and Stuteley and Scarlet and many of the rest. The knight held his breath from amazement. Each fellow shot through the garland until Middle, the tinker, stepped up for a trial. While he made a fair shot for a townsman, the arrow flew outside the rim of the garland. "Come here, fellow," said Little John, coaxing. "The priest will bless thee with his open hand." Coaxingly. There you go. Little John said coaxingly, "The priest will bless thee with his open hand." Then, because Middle made a sorry face and loitered in his steps, Arthur a Bland and Will Stuteley seized him by the arms and stood him before the friar. Tuck's big arm flashed through the air. Woof! Middle himself went rolling down and over on the grass. He was stopped by a small bush, and he sat up, rubbing his ear. The merry men roared, and the knight laughed till tears rolled down his face. After Middle's bad luck, others of the band fared in the same fashion. The garland would topple over, even though the arrows went through it. So Middle began to feel better when he saw these others also tumbling on the grass. At last came Robin's turn. He shot carefully, but as luck would have it, the shaft was badly feathered and swerved sideways so that it missed the garland. Then a great roar went up from the whole company. It was rare that they saw their leader miss his mark. Robin flung his bow upon the ground from irritation. "The arrow was sadly winged," he complained. "I felt the poor feather upon it as it left my fingers." Then suddenly picking up his bow again, he sped 3 shafts as fast as he could send them, and everyone went clean through the garland. "By St. George," muttered the knight, "I never before saw such a shooting in all Christendom." The band cheered heartily at these last shots, but Will Scarlet came up gravely to Robin. "Pretty shooting, master," said he, "but it will not save you from paying for the bad arrow. So walk up and take your medicine." "No, that may not be," protested Robin. "The good friar belongs to my company, and has no authority to lift his hand against me. But you, Sir Knight, stand for the king. I pray you, serve out my blow." "Not so," said Friar Tuck. "My son, you forget I stand for the church, which is even greater than the king." "Not this day," said the king in a deep voice. Then rising to his feet, he added, "I stand ready to serve you, Robin Hood." "Upstart knight," cried the Friar Tuck. "I told you last night, sir, that we should yet see who was the better man. So we will prove it now, and thus settle who is to pay Robin Hood." "Good," said Robin. "I do not want to start a dispute between church and state." "Good," also said the knight. "Come, friar, strike if you dare. I will give you first blow." "You have the advantage of an iron pot on your head and gloves on your hands," said the friar. "But down you shall go, even if you were Goliath." Goliath is the giant warrior of the Philistines, whom David, the youthful champion of the Israelites, killed with a stone from the sling. He was kind of comparing him to this big giant warrior. Once more the priest's brawny arm flashed to the air and struck with a woof. But to the amazement of all, the knight did not budge from his tracks, though the upper half of his body twisted slightly to ease the force of the blow. "Now my turn," said the knight coolly, casting aside his gauntlet. His gauntlet is a glove with armor protected by the hand. And with one blow of his fist, the knight sent Friar spinning to the ground. If there had been an uproar before, it was as nothing to the noise which now broke forth. Every fellow held his sides from laughter, every fellow except one, and that was Robin Hood. Out of the frying pan into the fire, he thought. He wished he had let the friar box his ears. After all, Robin's plight was indeed a sorry one, and now the knight turned on him and sent him tumbling head over heels. But Robin was spared the laughter of the merry men by an unexpected event. A horn sounded in the glade, and a party of knights was seen approaching. "To arms!" cried Robin, hurriedly seizing his sword and bow. "It's Sir Richard of Leah!" cried another, as the troop came nearer. And so it was. Sir Richard spurred his horse forward and dashed into the camp, near the spot where the Black Knight stood. He dismounted and knelt before him. I trust your majesty has not needed our help, he said humbly. "'Tis the king!" cried Will Scarlet, falling to his knees too. "The king!" echoed Robin Hood after a pause of amazement, and he and all his men bent reverently on their knees. Okay, so I guess the message that the king sent Robin Hood might have been that whack, but who knows? Okay, well, that is it for today, guys. Thanks for following along and reading with me. We just have 2 more chapters of Robin Hood. Please, like I said at the beginning of this video, do all that you can to stay on top and finish this quarter strong. Please reach out to me if you have questions. Those that are behind, you just have to make sacrifices this week. You just have to put aside playing games or watching videos or maybe sleeping in and get your work done. We just have 1 more week, work really hard, and then you can enjoy your Christmas break. I will see you guys in the next video.